Studio Ghibli is arguably the most famous anime studio of all time, and with the announcement of a new movie of theirs coming out soon, it seems like a fitting time to talk about something I've wanted to discuss for a while now. Everyone knows the Ghibli movies by Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata. Even if you don't know their names, which I highly doubt considering you're watching this video, you definitely know their work. Spirited Away, Princess Mononoke, My Neighbor Totoro, and Grave of the Fireflies are not only some of the most critically acclaimed anime of all time, but some of the most critically acclaimed films in general. However, Studio Ghibli's other directors have made some amazing films that I rarely hear people talk about when they bring up the studio. Enter Hirosama Yonebayashi, Yoshifumi Kondo, Hiroyuki Morita, and Tomomi Mochizuki. We'll get to Goro later. Kondo's first work as a director was on the pilot for a proposed TV show based on the Little Nemo series, which was not picked up. However, this short is still wildly impressive, especially for a pilot. The first films he worked on at Ghibli were animation director on Grave of the Fireflies and Kiki's Delivery Service, not to mention his character design role on Fireflies. After his work on Kiki, he directed the phenomenal Only Yesterday, followed up by the even more incredible Whisper of the Heart. Kondo's designs are characterized as much less cute than Miyazaki's or Takahata's, especially in Only Yesterday. Whereas Miyazaki's designs are much more anime-like and exaggerated, Kondo's designs have a lot more human details, the most notable of these being wrinkles on the vast majority of characters in Only Yesterday. It would not be an overstatement to say that Kondo likely would have been on the same level as someone like Takahata or possibly even Miyazaki if it weren't for his unfortunate death in 1998. His final work was as an animation director and character designer on the Anne of Green Gables film Road to Green Gables, which was not released until 2010. Mochizuki's first directing role was on the OVA Creamy Mommy Long Goodbye and the stealth pilot of Shonen Jump adaptation Kimagure Orange Road, the former of which being a fairly standard shoujo manga adaptation, and the latter being absolutely beautiful. It's one of the most artfully crafted Shonen Jump adaptations I've ever seen, and is far better than the actual series, which, while decent, is the generic Shonen Jump adaptation I was afraid of going into the pilot. He followed these two up with the shockingly bad Hikari no Densetsu. Well, maybe I got my hopes up too high after reading the description of this show and seeing there was a show about rhythmic gymnastics directed by Tomomi Mochizuki, but I was not a fan of this at all. My main issue with this show is the animation.
But inside, all old anime looks like garbage. That's just what old anime look like, you stupid dumb idiot.
I hear this sentiment echoed everywhere, and I find it incredibly disrespectful and just outright incorrect to say all old anime have bad animation, especially in the 80s. In the 80s, you had shows like Urusei Yatsura and Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam, and even shows that weren't based on massive pre-existing franchises such as Gunbuster and R20, or really anything by Studio Gainax from this decade. Hell, even some shows I've mentioned previously in this video, like the Kimagure Orange Road pilot, while not flawless and completely fluid, are still extremely visually appealing and are animated pretty nicely. This show is just extraordinarily stilted, even for a weird, obscure 80s show about gymnastics. Also, I swear to God I watched every episode of this show and I could not tell you a single thing that happened. It is actually the most forgettable anime I've ever seen. After working as an episode director on a few more shows, Mochizuki directed the 1988 film My Son Iko Kanketsuhen. This is the first full-length feature film Mochizuki directed, and how did he do? It's really bad, but the direction's pretty. I don't know if I need to watch the My Son Iko show to get it, but I was not a fan of this. Well, yes, the direction is above average. That doesn't stop this movie from being an absolute slog from front to back. Even though it's just over an hour long, it felt longer than the 19-episode television series I just talked about. I'm not going to say nothing ever happens, because that would be stupid. Things do indeed happen in this movie, we just take a little while to get there. After this, although I was a fan of the pilot he did for Kimagure Orange Road, I was not excited to watch the movie adaptation he directed the same year as My Son Iko, but I'm happy to report It's not bad. Kimagure Orange Road I Want to Return to That Day is a decent high school melodrama with fun characters and gorgeous directing. Now, while I wouldn't say this movie is exactly amazing or anything, it's very entertaining and I had a very fun time watching it. Pretty much the definition of a 7 out of 10. After this, he directed a promotional OVA for the Lika doll in Japan. This show is a commercial, but I'm not gonna lie, it makes me very happy. After the extremely boring Welcome to Greenwood and Ai Monogatari OVAs, we finally get to the reason we're talking about this man in the first place, that being Ocean Waves. This movie is shockingly horrible. Nothing about this movie is even of somewhat acceptable quality. This film has by far, not even close, the worst art style of anything I've discussed in this video so far. It is so ugly, I had to stop the movie 10 minutes in the first time I watched it. I'd also like to add how shockingly terrible the score of this film is. This was the last thing I expected, as Studio Ghibli has some of the most consistently incredible scores of any studio in film at large, not just anime, but this is just awful. It is actually one of the most distracting elements of the film and a huge part of why I initially dropped it back in 2021. After Ocean Waves, Mochizuki continued directing relatively obscure anime that very little people know about, with some pop hits sprinkled throughout, such as Studio Manglobe's House of Five Leaves. However, you would be hard-pressed to find a show directed by him after House of Five Leaves with a score above a 6 on MAL. Hideyuki Morita started out like both of the other people we've covered so far, by key animating and doing in-betweens on an absurd amount of classic anime, such as Akira, Kiki's Delivery Service, and Perfect Blue. Much like Kondo, he got his directing role on a Ghibli film via rising up the ranks as one of the best people working at the studio. Unlike Kondo, however, the only thing he had done before his first Ghibli film was key animation, in-betweens, and storyboards, in the case of the second film in the In Love offshoot of the Tenchi Muyo series. His first feature film, The Cat Returns, is my personal favorite Ghibli film. It's really hard for me to describe why I like this film so much without diving into the personal context of when I watched it, which I don't think anyone is here for, so I'll just focus on the most relevant aspect considering what we're talking about, that being the direction. The main characteristic of this film regarding the direction is how pulled back and big picture it feels. It makes the movie feel a lot larger scale than it would be if it were directed in the same style as Miyazaki's films. Morita followed this up with his second and final anime, unless you count this weird commercial thing that I can't seem to find anywhere, Bokurano. I don't like this show at all. This may set some people off, as from what I've seen, everyone except me loves this show. While the premise is very intriguing, the shockingly ugly art style as well as the stilted animation and subpar direction make the show pretty hard for me to watch, which is why I dropped it 6 episodes in. It seems Morita's just kind of been hanging out the past 15 years, mainly just doing key animation on stuff. Hiromasa Yonebayashi released his first Ghibli film, as well as his first film in general, when Marnie was there, on July 19th, 2014. While this movie is fairly uninteresting in terms of direction, its narrative emphasis on both mental and physical illness as well as self-hatred make it one of the most interesting films I've covered in this video. His second film, however, Mary and the Witch's Flower, is much, much worse. This movie was essentially marketed as the first film by the second coming of Ghibli Studio Ponok. Unfortunately, this film plays it so incredibly safe that it's just boring. It's essentially the driest, most milquetoast Ghibli ripoff I've ever seen that also happens to have a lot of Ghibli people working on it. Since Witch's Flower, unless you count the phenomenal With All Our Hearts ONA, Yonebayashi has not directed anything, his latest role being key animator on Spirited Away assistant director Masayuki Miyagi's The Deer King. Yonebayashi doesn't really have a super defined directing style. He has a few running plot elements such as depression and being an artist, but generally his direction isn't too much of note. While these 4 directors may not be as good as Miyazaki, I still think it's kind of insulting how much they're undermined as the other ones. Ghibli is not the Miyazaki studio. Studio Ghibli is internationally famous not because they make palatable entertainment suitable for a wide audience, but because of their boldness, versatility, and ability to take risks. And if you left Miyazaki exclusively, I think the studio would lose a lot of that. Goro, on the other hand, is a different story. The only reason Goro Miyazaki has been able to direct any anime movies as high profile as Tales from Earthsea and From Up on Puppy Hill is directly due to nepotism. I feel like a lot of people might misinterpret my message as we should hire random people to do Ghibli because otherwise it'll be boring. I think it is absolutely essential to make sure every director at Studio Ghibli has at least a decent level of talent. While I am personally not a fan of Mochizuki at all, I cannot deny the massive talent he displayed through the Kimogure Orange Road OVA and movie, and in turn recognize that it was completely warranted for him to be allowed to direct his own Ghibli movie. As much as movies like Earwig and the Witch scare me regarding Studio Ghibli's future, I'm still excited to see where they go next. If you liked this video, check out my other anime videos, and if you like those too, maybe consider subscribing to the channel. I also have a second channel called Inside Zoidberg's Hangout Hut where I post Let's Plays and vlogs and other stuff that doesn't fit on the main channel. This video was edited by Jellyu. I'll have his channel linked in the description and on the end card on screen. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next video.